Hello guys, let's look at personal effectiveness today. Personal effectiveness. I'll try and cover this. If I can't finish it in this video, then there will be a part B for this recording on personal effectiveness, and I will deal with the second batch at that point. What is personal effectiveness? Personal effectiveness is just how individuals, how staff of organization try to achieve their objective or their deliverables in a very efficient and effective way, right? So effectiveness is about achieving your objective. If I've asked you to go and prepare a financial statement and you cannot do it, then you are not effective. If it's taking you so long to prepare that it doesn't matter to me any longer by the time you finish it, then you are not effective. Though you finished it, but it's no more useful. So how do people get effective? How do they get to function well in an organization? That is what we want to look into now. But why is it even important to talk about this? It is important because that is how people can deliver quality value to any organization. Because if staff cannot deliver quality value to organization, then the organization cannot also achieve its objective. Remember, organization is made up of staff, so it's important they are effective. Now, what we want to look at is how can they get effective? How can staff get effective? There are 5 ways or 5 things that we'll be looking at going forward on how people can get effective. The first thing that is very important for any personal effectiveness is ability to communicate effectively. So we'll look at effective communication. That must exist in an organization for people to be effective. We'll look at personal development plan. I'll look at each of these things one after the other. Personal developmental plan, we call this PDP. Some of you might have heard about this before if you're already working. Then an organization must have what we call the competence framework. Likewise, effective time management. And the last one is mentoring, coaching, and counseling. So we're going to be looking at 5 ways of achieving a personal effectiveness, and we'll start from the first one, which is communication. And I ask you, what is communication? Yeah, we all know what it is. When we talk to one another, we are communicating. But let's put it in a more formal and structured way. Communication is a process. It's always a process, and I'll show you the process. But what do we do in this process? We are transmitting information between one another. So it's a process of transmitting information between people. And when we are talking of this information can be ideas, can be sharing ideas. It might be that a boss is giving instruction to his staff, or maybe a boss is giving feedback to people, right? So it can be any of this. But once there is an exchange of ideas, transmission of information, then you are communicating. Now, how do people communicate? Which is the process? Now let's look at the process. Which is very, very important that you know it is highly examinable. The first thing that is important is there has to be a sender. Because all of this must be present before you can have a complete communication. A sender is the person that wants to share an idea. And once there is a sender, the first thing that sender does is to encode the information. This is idea that he wants to share. So this is like idea conception. He will think about it. Then when he has thought about it, so I'm a sender. I just decided, I need to teach this guy's personal effectiveness today. Now that is encoding. I've encoded. Then the next thing is I need to transmit, which is what I am doing now. So I'm transmitting now. This is when I choose the channel through which I want to transmit. So this is like a channel. Yeah? And this channel can be in form of so many things. It can be a phone call. It can be email. It can be intranet. Yeah? It can be recording. Yeah? Like I'm doing now. Voice notes. It can be anything. Right? So now I've chosen the channel. Then I've transmitted through this. Then the next stage is receive. So you will receive it, and you are receiving it right now. When you receive it, it's just a sound that you are hearing. This is just a sound. Take it. It's just a sound. Until you do the decoding, which is the last stage. Not like the final, but is the final stage when you understand. So this is when you add meaning to the sound that you've heard from me. When you add meaning and you can make sense from what I am saying, then to complete this communication, you should give me thumbs up on the channel and say you are doing a good job. And that is the last stage of communication, feedback. You put a comment, well explained. Oh, in a short, very little time, I got this concept right. That's the feedback you are giving back to me. And that is when the 6 steps of communication is complete. What are types of communication? There are majorly 2 types. And we all do it. There's formal communication and there's informal communication. And what is the difference? Very easy. Formal communication is when you have exchange of ideas along line of authority. Maybe the boss is telling his staff to go and prepare a report, or the boss is giving feedback, to someone. So that is a formal communication. So is either a long line of authority, line of responsibility, or accountability. It's structured. It's not a random gist. This is not a gist. This is not a talk. This is structured. Whereas here, it is unstructured. Can be amongst peers, friends in the company, colleagues. And an example is grapevine, which is similar to what you call rumor. It's not a formal communication. This can be like email, can be mail broadcast, can be anything here on the formal one. So those are the 2 types of communication. And for personal effectiveness, it's not just being able to pass information or send across information. You must achieve what we call effective communication. That is what we want, not just communication. We want effective communication. And how do you conclude that communication is effective? What is the characteristics of effective communication? That communication must be understandable, which means the receiver can understand. You don't use French to communicate to someone that don't understand French. You go to India or Pakistan and you are speaking to people and you are speaking French. Probably if you are speaking Urdu or Hindi or language they can relate with, Not to say some of them don't, but you need to be sure that your receiver understands the language that you're speaking. Right. At least you speak in a simple way, also, not just about language as well. Don't make things feel so complicated, which is what I try to do even in my videos. I always think, what is the simplest way to really pass this knowledge across? Yeah, so it must be understandable, and you must use the right medium, you must use the right channel. Yeah, imagine you want to communicate to people that work in the warehouse or in the factory, and you are sending emails, and that information is urgent. They won't see it because they're on the floor. Those kind of people, you need to go there, or you make a phone call, or talk to them on their phone. So you need to use phone conversation for such. So right channel is very important, and that communication has to be timely. Yeah, not sending information when it is no more useful. Imagine sending financial statement 3 years after the year end. It's no more useful to the users, and it should be detailed as much as possible. So you need to provide necessary information as much as possible. So this is what we want. We want effective communication, but there are things that can damage effective communication, which is the barriers. I'll group them into two. Number one is the absence of all of these four things. If they are absent, then they are all barriers to effective communication. Then number two is noise. Noise. And what is noise? Noise is just anything that can distort communication. Anything that can distort communication is noise. And this can be physical or technical. And what is example of physical? Physical is just when you have a loud noise. Yeah? You have a loud sound. So people are not able to hear what people are talking about. I'm talking to people, but the noise is just too much. They can't hear me. And technical is when it is coming from technology. So take, for instance, you're joining me on a live video. I'm teaching you, but my internet is bad. So bad network. Yeah, sometimes you hear me, sometimes maybe you don't hear me, or sometimes my voice is sounding. That's not physical noise. That's technical noise because it is coming from the poor technology. So please take note. Now let's look at how do people communicate, which is methods of communication. There are 4 methods. Yeah, the first one is verbal, which is by speaking. Yeah, e.g., phone call. You can also communicate by written. This one, e.g., you can have, so you are using letters. So, e.g., email or reports. That is writing communication. So that's the third one is visual, and this one you can be using images, you can be using graphs, yeah, pictures, and people can also use body language to communicate. And take, for instance, you might be nodding to say yes or shaking your head to say no. What you are doing is you are using your gesture to communicate. Some people, their sad face says it all, that they are not happy and they are sad. So those are the methods of communication. The last thing on communication I'm going to touch on is the patterns of communication. Patterns of communication. There are 2 major types of patterns for communication, yeah, and I'll group them into 2, which is what I said, centralized communication. There's always a central point of communication, and there's a decentralized form of communication. So there's a centralized pattern and there's a decentralized pattern. On that centralized pattern, you have 3 examples. The first one is the wheel, and I will draw it. That's the easiest way to know it, which looks like this. So there is someone in the center that does the communication, this big head. So once it communicates, everybody gets it at once. It goes like that. And this is usually the fastest mode of communication. The second pattern of communication is chain. And as you will imagine, a chain is a straight kind of a line. So you have the big boss communicating to another person in chain like that on a straight line. So the information goes from one person to another person to another person. And this is quite slow. So this is a slow process of communicating. And this is very common in if you find an hierarchical kind of organization, you see this kind of mode of communication. Hierarchy is such of importance. The third one I'm going to talking about under the centralized form of communication is the Y pattern, where you have the big boss here. It communicates to another person. Then this person shares the information with other people in the organization. So it looks like Y like that. And those are the three forms of centralized pattern of communication. But there is another form that is not centralized like this. In that case, there is no center point. And there are two types here. The first one is the circle. And looks like a circle like this. You have people on the line of the circumference of the circle. And what this means is that for each person on the circle, you can get communication and you can also communicate to the next person. So there's always two sides to the communication. Only two ways. And nobody can jump the person between them to communicate. You must always go through one person. So you can go through one person or you can receive from that another person. Right. The second one under decentralized is the all channel. All channel. And all channel means anyhow, any way. So you just see it like this. It can be in any form. Anybody can talk to anybody. You don't need to talk to someone. You can go through any means of speaking to anybody. All channel. Yeah, this is very common in a social kind of settings, or when you have a project teams where people sit in a project room and they can actually talk to each other without necessarily going through a particular protocol. That's it about communication. Remember, we're talking about how to be personally effective, and we said there are 5 things that every organization must make sure is in place to have people achieving personal effectiveness. So we've dealt with effective communication. Now let's talk about PDP, which is Personal Development Plan. PDP. That's the second thing organization must make sure is in place. PDP. What is PDP? I'll break it into 3 things. PDP is an action plan. So it's an action plan to do 2 things. Number 1, that action plan contains, so it sets out personal goals of individual. So your personal goals and how you want to achieve the goals. So those are the 3 things you must know. So there's an action plan, and that action plan contains the goals and how the goals will be achieved. That is what personal development plan is all about. But how is it prepared? What is the process of preparing personal development plan? The first thing that you must do is to perform what I will call gap analysis. Gap analysis. And when you are doing gap analysis, what are you doing? You are checking what is the aspiration of this person. What is the ambition? You can say, okay, in 5 years, I want to become a manager. That is your aspiration. That is your ambition. Then you check what is the current state. Where is it currently? Currently, you say it's just an officer. So, which means there's a gap between the aspiration and the current situation. So that is the first thing you need to achieve. Once you discover there is a gap, Then this is the point where you now check, what does it need to close that gap? Yeah. So you identify the weaknesses that needs to be closed. You can also identify the strengths that needs to be sustained. And once you finish that, then you can set SMART objectives. SMART objectives. And you remember what SMART objectives is all about. When we say SMART, we're saying the objective that we are setting must be specific, which means must be identifiable, must know what we're trying to achieve, must be measurable. How do we know that we have achieved that objective? Yeah, if we say this guy must know how to prepare financial statement, how do we measure that he has now known how to prepare financial statement? It must be achievable. Someone that has not even been able to have a degree or study accounting at all, we cannot expect that person to be able to prepare financial statement. So it has to be something achievable. It must be realistic. We cannot say you need to finish ACCA in 6 months. You can't even write 13, 14 exams in 6 months. So that's not realistic. And it has to be timing, which means if you want to say before you can become a manager, the goal is to have ACCA, then we need to put time to that to say it must have ACCA by December 31st, 2027. 2 years plan, and we know we have a time to it. So these objectives must be very SMART, having those 5 attributes. So once we set the objective is how we will close those weaknesses. How, we've identified weakness in the first step. So how the weakness will be closed? What do we need to do? E.g., it needs to write ACCA. That's an example. It needs to develop interpersonal skills. So then you go to the third step because we have objective. We now need to agree the mode. So we need to agree training and development program. What are we going to do? How is he going to back the ACCA? How is he going to complete his exams? We say, okay, let's register him with TutorStar. Let's give him the YouTube video link to TutorStar so that he can listen to the videos and get exam-focused tutoring, saves time, and pass easily. Those are plans. You're making plans. Once the plans are made, then you go to the first steps, which is to prepare resources. You now ask yourself, what do we need? We need money because we need to get him a computer. We need to get him Wi-Fi. We need to get him network. We need to get him internet. We need to get him books. We need to get him questions to practice. And do we have those resources? Do we have enough budget? You need to be sure because you can do the best gap analysis, set the best objectives, prepare a fantastic plan and program. If you don't have resources, you are wasting your time. And the last thing is to now perform feedback. This is when you check whether your goals have been achieved. So you're checking if the goals you set have been achieved. If not, you might need to do it differently. So that is all about PDP. Very important for every organization.